If you've been living anywhere outside of Iraq over the last month, you'd have doubtless borne witness to the greatest event in sim racing history! Well, no, not really, but something pretty cool all the same. The long-awaited sequel to 2014's Assetto Corsa, one of the most popular racing simulators of all time, to this day drawing almost 20,000 daily players on Steam alone, AC Evo, finally released into early access for all to try. The first run of reviews are already out, and so far you've heard from GigaChad influencers.
Carpation is a state. Carpation.
So I think it's fair to say that in its current state, the game is quite primitive, quite basic, quite bare bones.
Real-life racing drivers.
Nice little burnout.
And grumpy jaded guys. But something wasn't quite complete. Something ephemeral you couldn't quite place your finger on. As it turns out, you needed a guy from Australia with absolutely no racing pedigree, nor any platform or foundation to speak about sim racing, to tell you what to think about this game. And yes, let it be known that I've heard your plea, dear viewer, and I agree, I am the man for the job. Because here, we aren't only inordinately jacked and handsome, but also extremely humble. Dropping almost 10 years to the day from the original Assetto Corsa's release, Evo's goal is implicit in the name itself. A direct evolution from the original. Upon loading into the menu, you'll be greeted with a familiar Kunos aesthetic, albeit with the faint feeling that they may just have been playing some Gran Turismo over their holiday break, because the features intended for Evo are very clearly trying to take what were once compartmentalized, segregated racing game modes and unify them into a collective game, complete with licenses, car showrooms, car customizability, and even purchased aftermarket parts. Hell, they even copied those wholesome 90s Japanese arcade game sounds.
Ridge Racer!
And the cool post-race jazz. Now, bear in mind that essentially none of these promised features are in the game yet. Currently, we're saddled with either solo practice or racing against the AI. So, because we're big boy PC sim racers with big boy PC sim racer pants and a boatload of disposable income, we do as all PC elitists and head straight to the graphics menu in order to turn the sliders as far right as they will possibly go, setting ourselves up to complain when we inevitably don't get the blistering frame rates we so crave. In place of the original's PP modes, this new game has various color grading presets going from defaults through a variety of both cinematic and natural modes. With the exception of Cinematic 3's overexposure blinding me so hard that I couldn't even see where I was driving, all of the modes felt perfectly usable and were a refreshing change from that urine yellow colored soak of the original AC's color grades. At least before Custom Shaders patch came along to expose us to a new era of sim racing eye goodness. I like Cinematic 1 by the way, because as a content creator you need some of that hyper-real, over-contrasted vibe so that your comments sections invariably flare up with comments like, "Dude, bro, how do you get the game looking like that? Mine looks like crap on my PS2 for real, yo, Rizzle Dog," or something. The game showroom is quite a sight to behold. In fact, messing with the time of day and environments is almost a mini-game unto itself, trying to see how gorgeous and dramatic you can get your car looking. I mean, look at that. It's almost like I have a decade of experience creating pro-tier clickbait thumbnails. The initial early access release ships complete with 20 cars, including the Abarth 695 Biposto, the Alfa Romeo Giulia GTM, the Alfa Romeo Junior, the Alpine A110S, the Alpine A29 Audi RS3 Sportback, BMW M2 CS Racing, BMW M4 CSL, Chevrolet Camaro ZL1, Ferrari 296 GTB, Ferrari 488 Challenge Evo, Ford Escort RS Cosworth, Honda S2000, Hyundai i130 and hatchback, Lotus Emira, Mazda MX-5 ND Cup, Mercedes AMG GT2, Porsche 911 992 GT3 Cup, Toyota GR86, and finally, the Volkswagen Golf Mark 8, GTI, Club Sport. Seriously, screw these manufacturers and their contrived model names. What happened to just calling cars something simple and elegant, like the Ferrari Testa di Car. Our first choice to experience this coming marvel of motor racing was the BMW M2 CS Racing at Brands Hatch, because you guys know just how much I love BMW. As I took my first tentative drive out of the pits, it dawned on me that at this juncture, that I had not sim raced in around a year, nor driven a real car in over 2 years. Long story. That's precisely what made my first lap of AC Evo so magnificently special. I took to the driving experience as if I'd never stopped. The braking immediately made sense. The throttle made sense, and above all, the weight transfer and sensation of the car felt immediately sublime. Before long, I was munching those curbs, sending it like someone who'd accidentally miscalculated and done a snatch and grab of goods worth slightly more than $950 in California. But finally, look at this. Do you see that? That is the look of a car in motion, with realistic physics forces acting on its body. No longer do we have a disembodied game world object floating through space with an array of canned visual animations acting on it to represent what's happening. It actually looks like a car existing in Newtonian space. And moreover, look at how glorious the game looks without all of that weird Unreal Engine 4 visual jank. No more temporal anti-aliasing that looks like someone slapped a Gaussian blur filter across the entire image and then tried to overcompensate for it by jacking up a bunch of artificial post-processing sharpening sliders. It looks crisp, it looks clean, it looks like a bloody racing simulator again. Even with all settings completely dimed, I managed to get some very raceable frame rates from within the cockpit. The game felt perfectly playable. The exterior replays, unfortunately, were a bit of a different story. The frame rate tanked noticeably on exterior cameras, especially during dense races. This may have been due to me jacking up the depth of field quality way too high, but I guess we'll never know because Kunos never seem to include tooltips to let you know what any of their menu settings mean, nor what sort of a gameplay hit you should expect to take for using them. The game's appearance is honestly conflicting. In some conditions, like the car showroom, and on certain tracks during certain weather conditions at certain times of day, it looks absolutely stellar. But during others, it can look decidedly flat in last gen. Perhaps it's because I spent my time in Sim Racing Exile playing titles like Remnant 2 and Star Citizen, which look inordinately good, that coming back to sim racing always feels like walking a decade or so into the past. I don't know. What do you think, Scary Heavy Armor Man? Does Star Citizen look a little better than AC Evo? Yeah, mate. I think so too. But the important thing is that the racing was good. Almost too good, honestly. The feel of Assetto Corsa Evo strikes me as closer to the original AC than it does to Assetto Corsa Competizione, the little GT car-centric side quest they embarked on between the mainline titles. It's like if you can imagine all of the intuitiveness of the original AC's driving, but with a tire model that doesn't send you into outer space the moment you touch a moderately geometrically complex curb. On top of that, far more natural damper and suspension feel than the original, extremely progressive, with an absolutely wonderful sensation of the car grip hooking in the moment you finally settle into a compression such as the one at the end of Brand's T1. I found myself lapping a lot. Too much, even. Late at night, looking down at my sweat-riddled body, I wondered why I was in so much pain, only for Steam to inform me that I'd been at it for 11 hours straight. It was at that moment I realized that Kunos had done exactly what they stated here. This, quite literally, is a direct evolution on all things Assetto Corsa. No more, no less. My further outings in other cars made me realize that Kunos learned one astoundingly important lesson from their last two games: to give players a great default car tune. In fact, all the cars I took out onto the track felt immediately balanced and correct. First impressions count for so much, and it's amazing to not have to sit there for an hour twiddling settings to get something remotely drivable. You can get straight out onto the track and start juking it out. You can actually treat this as a driving simulator rather than a racing engineer simulator. Imagine that. I've heard some comments about Evo's handling model being too forgiving, especially as the car begins to break traction and slide, but I respectfully disagree. To me, the driving feels, above all, intuitive. If you've had the pleasure of driving just about any automobile made since the 1990s, it's pretty self-evident that most modern cars are quite intuitive to drive. It's not exactly a difficult thing to do, so then why would we want to suffer through the experience in a racing simulator? For so long, we've dealt with bizarre, janky handling characteristics where cars break from expected behaviors and we have to treat curbs like they're made of glass or avoid breaking traction at all costs. iRacing. What? If you overdrive the car across consecutive corners and get your tire heat up, that car is going to snap back on you. You can't just keep it in an infinite slide. Likewise, if you grab an angular inside curb too aggressively, well, you'll find out. It's generally accepted that in terms of car sounds, the top-tier title in the industry has long been the new Dirt Rally games, or WRC, or whatever they're called now. But Kunos made some great strides toward oral fidelity in Assetto Corsa Competizione. My only complaint with that title was that the car sounds were too processed, like they cranked up the compression and distortion to make the feeling more visceral, but somehow forgot that the driver's ear isn't literally in the engine bay. So, I'm happy to report that on select cars, usually the race cars where the team have clearly captured the sound of the vehicle themselves, the sounds are decidedly more muted and realistic, sort of like what you'd expect from Race Room. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't carry over to all the cars. In fact, many of the road cars still have that strange combination of a modulating synthesizer engine combined with canned turbo blow-off noise from the original AC. Damn, that's downright bogan. So, the sounds are very much a mixed bag currently, ranging from the sublime and excellent to the entirely forgettable and uninspiring. With their goal of including 100 cars for release, I'd be amazed if Kunos can actually get a team together to capture the sound of each one on track. But you never know. They're rich boys now, and if they can afford to undertake the insane task of coding their own graphics engine, I'm sure they can also give a little love to the sounds. Why so opinionated on the sounds, Erman, I hear you ask? Well, friend, that's because I've been a professional audio engineer for the better part of 20 years. Ah, yes, it finally makes sense now in your mind, doesn't it? Why my voice always sounds so breathy and sexy. Anyway, unlike all other opinions in this video, which you should completely disregard and pretend you never heard, why the hell are you still watching anyway? My opinion on the sounds is in fact not an opinion. Think of it more like an edict from God, etched in some eternal tablet of absolute universal truth. Now, on the topic of more forgettable things, I'm afraid to say that this is squarely what the wet weather racing in AC Evo presently is. The wet visuals are decidedly last gen, nowhere near the insane fidelity created by later versions of custom shaders patch. The frame rate hit is so great that the experience simply isn't worth it either. Wet weather driving is very much its own thing, and if anybody is going to unseat iRacing in this realm, it's going to take a serious concerted effort. A proper multi-million-dollar R&D campaign, and maybe internally, Kunos have decided that their time is better spent on other aspects of the driving experience. I certainly couldn't fault them for that. And speaking of driving with low frame rates, there's certainly been a lot of hoopla about the AI in this game. Under normal circumstances, this would be completely irrelevant because we'd all just beeline it immediately to the Nordschleife track day servers, am I right? But unfortunately, this tentative early access release comes with no multiplayer, so we can either hot lap by ourselves in a practice session or drive against whatever the hell this is. To their credit, the first lap behavior of the AI will prepare you perfectly for what you're going to encounter in the public lobbies the moment multiplayer goes live. So props to Kunos for very accurately modeling the yeety teenage temperament and mental derangement of your average bedroom racer. When they eventually neatly settle into a column, the AI become more of an obstruction rather than something you actively race against. Every single one of my races was a last to first challenge with the AI at 100%, though for some reason the loading screen kept saying 97%, and in some races I was literally in first place before the first lap was over. If they're planning on a proper single-player career with licenses, progression, and unlocks, that means a lot of mandatory racing against AI, and if that's going to be the case, the AI really need to start bringing their A-game, because this Forza open lobby stuff just ain't gonna do it. There is not much more to say about AC Evo in its present state. The initial early access release is clearly but a taste of things to come. The game only comes with 5 tracks: Brands Hatch, Imola, Suzuka, Laguna Seca, and Mount Panorama. Think of it as a taster board, getting you ready for the entree and then subsequently delivering the main course. Now, at this point you might be wondering, well, if it's this sparse on content, should I actually spend 47 AUD, or whatever it costs in your currency if you don't use dollary dues?
$900 dues!
All I can say is that if Evo continues on the trajectory it has mapped out in this release and continues delivering quality content along these lines, then the current price will be an absolute no-brainer. No, an absolute bargain given what we're likely to have by the 1.0 release. And consider for how many years Kunos updated both the original and ACC, tuning them to become ever better over the course of their life cycles. I mean, for God's sake, in the initial early access release of ACC, the Huracan drove like a boiler tank on ice skates, and they eventually tuned that game into arguably the best GT simulator in the world. Think of this as an investment into the future. The more you pay into this now, the more flexibility you give Kunos to give us a more complete racing simulator over time. If I got a chance to make feature requests at this juncture, I would say, Kunos, it's 2025. I think we're finally ready for two things. 1. Tooltips that actually explain what the hell we're modifying in your game, and 2. I think I speak for the entire sim racing space collectively when I say this, but we're ready for the real deal. Yes, hear me out. Real gravel traps. If I'm stupid enough to get myself lodged in the sandpit, let me spin my tires and slowly dig myself further into my own inevitable disqualification, just like the millionaires do in real life. There is clearly a boatload of passion in this project, and I can only imagine how unhinged things will become when we all have access not only to the multiplayer, but also the Nürburgring area free roam, as well as the Nürburgring itself. And just as you've been seeing me there for years now on the original AC, perhaps one day we'll cross paths together on the green hell, basking in our mutual love for racing. Until then.